You ask them, I'll answer them. Your questions are my answers, and in some cases, I'm answering questions that you've asked on Q's and A's. So this is like a really long form conversation where I didn't realize that a carrier pigeon would be a faster form of contact. Use Google Maps to find my carrier pigeon address. I'm pretty sure it's there. First question, getting straight into it because who's got time for blah, blah, blah? I say a minute and a half into the video. Dave Payne 78 asked about the benefit of the wind going away from the head. Whenever I think about the winding of strings, I try to keep the strings going over the nut in as straight of a line as possible. So that's why whenever I do it, I do the outer ones towards the outside of the head and the two inner ones towards the inside, just because you get a much nicer, straighter look. Try to keep them as straight as possible, the least amount of binding in the strings, less wear, more stability for tuning, all of that. And actually, if you want to see how I do that, I've got about 100 and something guitars on my website, down below, that will have wonderful head pictures of these guitars. All right, keeping with the strings, can you tell me about the strings at the ball end? Is it better to use the ball or to cut it off? Whatever you do, if there is a ball attached to your strings for your nylon guitar, throw them away. Get better strings. There are no strings that are good that have a ball attached to them. Okay, that said, the reason you do not want a ball end string is the way that you have to put them on. When you feed a string through here, through the hole, and then pull it all the way through, you hear that zoink sound. It's very satisfying, but that's a whole bunch of little metal saws that are just ripping right through your bridge, and you're gonna pull it through on one side and pull it right back out on the other. You are causing exceptionally fast wear to your bridge. One of the little tricks I use at my shop, especially new guitars with a really high break angle, sometimes the hole and the string, they just don't want to go together. And what I'll do is I'll take a string and I'll just go zoop, zoop, you know, just give it a few back and forths, you know, not wearing out the backside of the hole, but just the front, kind of flossing or shoe shining it. And that's just enough to relieve the hole so I can easily slide a string through it. Now, if you're doing that time in and time out with a ball end string, you're not gonna have any bridge left. It'll wear it out fairly quickly, and by fairly quickly, I mean like 20 years. All right, question next from Hrothgar 2002, love that name. You ask about the authorities saying which way to string things. Should the first and sixth string be wound in towards the center of the headstock whilst the other strings go to the outside? And how does one achieve that? I believe that those authorities are the big ones who proposed that was Yamaha in their literature. And the reason they do that is because their headstocks go like this, whereas modern classical guitar headstocks go like this. So if you have a headstock that goes like this, they want you to wind it out so that way you are not running into the middle of the headstock. Try to keep your strings as straight as possible. If you, again, kind of mentioned this earlier, if the strings are going at extreme angles, you know, off of the nut, you're going to have accelerated wear on the back of your nut. And you're going to also have a imbalance in tension from one side of the string to the other. So tuning instability. I find that guitars are a very interesting proposition because, you know, traditionally a classical guitar and a flamenco guitar weren't all that different. Basically, it was a matter of economics, not what you played on them. Nowadays, you can typically see that a flamenco guitar is cypress sides and back, and a rosewood guitar is a classical guitar. But way back until at a certain point in time, those instruments didn't have a difference. It was just a matter of economics. So the guitar, once they brought it out, was at an uncertain level of state of existence, if you will. And really, truly, you don't know if it was a flamenco guitar or a classical guitar. So, you know, you've got a little bit of Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty until somebody picks it up and plays it. So, you know, basically the guitar is sitting at two planes of musicality until it's played, which is very strange, which, you know, that's just a bit of my string theory. All right, moving on. Anyways, from stringing a guitar, I mentioned cleaning up the fingerboard. How do I do that? Let me show you. As you can see, this guitar has a pretty gross fingerboard. It's got corroded frets, and it's got a lot of finger oils on here. And by the way, you at home, I don't recommend that you do this. If you're a professional, yeah, you can do this maybe. It's scary. So I have this thing called a Beal wood buff, which is a multi-step buffing wheel system. And I use Ruby Rouge, which is rubies impregnated in carnauba wax and a few other things. And I've got it mounted to this wheel. This is the first layer cutting wheel. I don't need anything fancier than this because it's generally pretty easy. I have it mounted directly to a electric motor. Find one in your basement. That's where I found mine. So as you can see here, it's shiny here and dull here. One of our friends in Ohio developed the system, and it's something I do to every single guitar that comes to the shop because it, A, gives the frets a really nice polished look, which really looks great, and B, it adds just enough protectant to the surface of the fingerboard without making it look ugly. In order to get any of the excess waxes off or whatever, I just use a paper towel to wipe that off. As you can see, there's a little bit of extra goo here, but it comes out pretty clean. Now, if you don't like the shiny look, but you still want that protection, what you can do is take a little bit of water and wipe that onto the fingerboard and dry it off, and you can see the difference, shiny or not shiny. That's up to you. That's a personal preference. But otherwise, at home, if you are cleaning, they have the metal erasers. They work pretty well. There's a cotton wadding. I'll have a link to it in the description. It's used on rims for cars that removes tarnish. For the most part, that works pretty well. I'd be a little careful around the fingerboard itself, but just on the metal bits, it works pretty well. Otherwise, I know people say steel wool. I'm not a big fan of steel wool. The little crumbly bits gets everywhere. Next question, Guitar Fritz 1906. You talked about the truss rod in this Rob Scallon video, and why are modern guitarists looking for a truss rod, and do they affect the instrument? This guitar just so happens to have a truss rod in it. I'm not necessarily opposed to a truss rod, but I can hear typically guitars that have a truss rod in them versus ones that don't, or the ones that have a carbon fiber D-tube or whatever. And that's because of the way that they are installed. When you install a truss rod, you have to carve a groove up the middle of the neck to drop that into, which creates a void. So you don't have intimate contact between the fingerboard and the neck. So you get a little bit of a less efficient transfer of energy. And sometimes that can manifest in a third string and fourth string that don't ring out equally as well as the others. Or in some cases, if the rod is ever so slightly too tight, it can create hot spots inside of it, typically around the 2nd fret and the 10th or 11th fret, where the 3rd and 4th strings are exceptionally energetic because that's where the rod is pushing or pulling, or likewise in the 7th fret area. Anyways, I can hear it. And granted, it's taken me a long time to be able to realize what I was hearing. So that's why I'm personally not a big fan of truss rods in high-end instruments. In medium instruments, you know, let's call it 5,000 and under, I'm actually all for it, because some of the major problems that those instruments have are typically caused by bad relief in the neck. When you have a bad relief in the neck, the typical fix is to take out the frets and replane it. If you have a truss rod, that's a much cheaper adjustment, $50, $75, $100, opposed to $800 or $900 plus for a new refret, or at least that's what it costs in my shop. I'm in favor of them on lower end guitars in my world, but at the very upper end, I don't like them. I feel like they should be built right for a person or for a certain caliber of player. Otherwise, you're gonna have issues. As far as the rest of the question, do I find that there's a rising trend among players that are looking for a guitar with truss rod? No. I feel like that's always been fairly flat. If not, I'm finding that it's dropping off because the younger players are becoming more and more enlightened as to the proper build of a guitar. The younger players are growing up with an understanding of the classical guitar, not necessarily backing into it from a steel string guitar perspective or an electric guitar perspective. So yeah, thank you for the question. Links to some of the products I've mentioned are down below. Go check out the website. I've got a YouTube promo that'll be down in the description. Thanks for staying. I'll see you next time.